All right, everybody. This is Dave from the Working Fans Podcast, and today we have a returning guest. We actually did a phone interview once with about 2 years ago. Former ECW, WWE great, trained by Jim Lancaster. Welcome back to the show, Al Snow.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
No problem, Al. It's great. And like I was just telling you off the air, one of the couple of things I wanted to ask you a couple of things. I went back at the interview, and there's always things you look back and go, "Oh, I wish I would have asked him about this." And you did so much, you've done so much stuff, and we had concentrated about you being a wrestler and OVW and stuff. And I was thinking, we never talked to you about being a road agent in Impact Wrestling. I was kind of wondering,
Huh.
what was that experience like for you?
I enjoyed it very much. It was kind of a, it's kind of an extension of what I was doing in the ring as far as wrestling. I just wasn't personally physically in the ring wrestling, but I still got to be creative in the sense that I would help talent lay out a match, and pacing and trying to give them direction and trying to ensure that the vision and the chapter of the story that was being told that particular week was properly told, so that then the writers would have what they needed to go forward the following week, based off of what was done. That's something that people don't understand is that um, you know everybody moans and whinges about the writers and they hold them responsible, but at the end of the day, it's really the talent that are in the ring that are responsible, because the writers can only do or work off of what the wrestlers when they're in the ring give them. So if the wrestlers don't give them the right thing, or the right business is not conducted during that particular match that week, well then it affects what goes forward the following week and the week after that, and etc. And it makes it a little more difficult.
Yeah. I mean, we had talked about that a little bit the first time too. And I think one of the things you were talking about was it's important to ask the right questions and just ask questions in general when dealing with creatives.
Yes, it is very important, so that you have an understanding as a performer as to what they're trying, what story they're trying to do, what part in it you play, so that overall you can you know keep an audience interested and keep them wanting to come back the week after week to watch as it plays out.
It's interesting how I was just thinking as you're saying this, like, ask the right questions, communicate. I feel like this is stuff you're learning in wrestling, but this is stuff that applies to almost any job too.
Well, it does. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It does. It does. It's not. There are a lot of things that are very unique to the wrestling business. The wrestling business is like every other business in a majority of ways, but in some ways, there are a lot of unique things that are only intrinsic to the wrestling business itself. You know, um, for instance, like if you decide you want to go into business tomorrow and you buy a Jimmy John's franchise. Well, all you have to do is you've got to market the sandwiches. Then Jimmy John's as a franchisor is going to help you, market your product. With professional wrestling, the product are the talent, and that makes things a lot more interesting. Sometimes a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult, because unlike the sandwiches don't have their own agendas. They don't have egos. They don't have insecurities. They're not narcissistic. They're not, high level uh, athletes that are also complex artists that you have to manage and, try to get the most out of them every single time they go out to perform, even when it maybe not feel like it's in their best interest to them. So with a sandwich, with Jimmy John's, hey, it's pretty much make a great sandwich, let people know it's there, they show up. Professional wrestling, it's the sandwiches have their own ideas. So, it makes it a little more of a challenge.
It's interesting. As we're talking about that too, you talk about like, we'd say like, okay, so these do apply to other jobs and stuff, but you hear
Sure.
wrestling, we talk about the basics and stuff. Um, is it because wrestlers in general are so unique because it is like this half sport, half entertainment that the basics are almost more challenging sometimes. Like most of these guys, girls may not fit into a regular job. Maybe.
In the past, when I first, broke in back in '82, I'd say probably 98% of the performers, the workers in professional wrestling, were probably some of the most intelligent, most creative, um, and probably the most eccentric people I'd ever met. And if it had not been, quite honestly, if it hadn't been for professional wrestling, I honestly I don't know what they would have done to be a responsible, contributing part of society. There were a lot of them that if they hadn't been in professional wrestling, probably would have been in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Today I think it's a little different. The generations, this generation, you can see them going off and doing other things, working in other positions and other roles in the real world. And back then they were so eclectic that they were just such outside the norm of society that it would have been very difficult for them um, to fit in to a normal job, a normal 9 to 5 job. You know what I mean? Really been would have been a major challenge for them to put aside, especially if they'd spent any time in the wrestling business. That you almost live in your own world, and in the wrestling business, separate from the regular world, because it has its own rules, it has its own hours, it has its own you know um, etiquette, its own behavior, everything. And but I think today, I think the advantage of a lot of the younger talent is that they're much easier to be able to adapt to the real world than what the older generation probably were.
Hmm. Yeah, I just we'll move on, but one more thing about this because I'm enjoying this. But talking about the differences, that makes me think. I have these conversations with a friend of mine sometimes, and we'll talk about society and where we're headed, and how there's good here, but maybe not so good here, and you get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, I'm curious. So when you talk about the wrestlers of the past, maybe they don't quite fit in everywhere else, but are they like so deep into this that creatively that's why maybe things were at a height before?
Yeah, I mean the reason that a big difference I contend, and it's not that I lament what has gone on before. I just point out what has been before and where it is different, and why. And a large part of the reason why it was what it was before was for two reasons. One, there was an older generation that was always present to kind of lead the way for the younger generation that came in after, in the sense that they were very cognizant of teaching um, the art that was intrinsic, that was necessary, that was, and they passed that down from generation to generation. Uh, that after it was WrestleMania 3, I think. That's where things started to change on both parts. One of the older generation being able to pass it down because more of that older generation had departed um, the wrestling business, and two, um, because of the shift in the paradigm of professional wrestling, where um, so many of the regional offices, the territories, ceased to exist because of the expansion by Vince McMahon. There were fewer and fewer places for professional wrestlers to be able to make a steady full time living doing professional wrestling and nothing else, unless they were under contract to Vince McMahon. Um, and that then became that's where the real transition started, because in professional wrestling, because it is a business, you know, it was all very much focused on motivating as many people as possible to want to pay to witness the event, to watch it, to take part in it. Um, and then with the loss of that older generation and the loss of the ability for the younger generation to actually have to depend on um, professional wrestling as their sole means of income, meaning that they would have a regular job and then they would then pursue professional wrestling more as a side project or a hobby. Well, then the focus for the performers became less and less and less about measuring success based off of how many people showed up to witness the event and how much of a factor they personally were in that success, to more of about receiving critical acclaim, receiving a critique about their match from someone who, quite honestly, is just a well-informed fan who's never done it, but is a very well-informed fan and or fans and are very well educated, but they don't have any real knowledge because they have no commensurate amount of experience to go along with that information. And as a result, um, performers started basing their success not off of attendance and how much of a factor they were, but more off of whether or not they got a well-received critical acclaim for their performance. And the more that's shifted away, you see the ultimate result, which is that now the performers themselves have lost focus on what is the very thing that they're trying to sell to an audience, that an audience pays to see, that is motivated to want to watch on a weekly basis, just even on television alone, um, because they get what they want, what they've tuned in to see. That's been so shifted so far from that we're in a state where ratings are dropping on a regular basis for across the board, um, for wrestling, or for a wrestling product. And live attendance is also becoming more and more of a challenge for that very reason. Not because of the excuses that so many give of, oh, well, they have less of attention span, and, or the audience has too many options now. Audience has always had options. Let's face it, there's always been competition. There's always been challenges. There's always entertainment options for an audience that they can spend their money on. It comes down to whether or not the audience, when they spend their money, get what it is they paid to see, witness, receive. And um, we've gotten so far away from that in professional wrestling these days that, you know, as a result, the backlash is that we're starting to lose that very audience.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting how important. I mean, again, just a fan, but like how important as I get older too. I'm 45. Character development and stuff. I realized from watching other stuff over the last several years. I got into the Marvel movies and stuff like that, and it occurred to me, oh, we're integrating different characters. Like we're getting this character over in this film, and then he has his big movie, and I just started doing it with my girlfriend. She didn't even realize like we had to watch her different shows. And now when we go see some of the movies and these other character pops up, she recognizes them. She has, this relationship with them. And I'm like, man, this is just pro wrestling 101 in a lot of ways, I feel.
It is, because the two key things that we have always sold successfully in professional wrestling, and they're the only two things. There's only one thing that's fake in wrestling, contrary to popular belief, and that is just the outcome is predetermined. Everything physically that happens in that ring is 100% quite real. It is simply the intent behind it that is what we're trying to convince you of. We're trying to convince you that we're in the ring trying to win, that we're trying not to lose, that we're going to do whatever we're going to do so that we can gain an advantage, maintain that advantage, and then at some point capitalize on that advantage to win. And then the second most important thing is that we're selling who we are. And if you can believe in who we are, you'll believe in anything we do. And unfortunately, the performers have gotten so far removed from that. Because when, I'm sure if you were any kind of a wrestling fan, or if you're any kind of a fan of Marvel movies or any movie whatsoever, or a book, storytelling is the formula does not change from one platform to the other. Whether you write it in a book, you do it in a screenplay, you do it as a television show, a movie, a live theater production, or if you do it as far as professional wrestling is concerned, which is the art of physical storytelling within the context of a competitive situation. No matter how you do it, you have to always have a structure of rules that that the world that you're watching this operates in, so that things make sense to an audience that are either witnessing it. And then you've got to have an antagonist, and then you have to have a protagonist. In wrestling terms, that's a heel and a babyface. And the most important thing, is absolutely essential, is that your protagonist has to do what we in wrestling call get over with the audience, which means, and this applies to films, this applies to books, this applies to everything. And that is where the reader, you, the audience, want to live vicariously through, and you identify with the protagonist. It's absolutely essential, because if this does not occur, okay, there is no way, no matter what the antagonist does, no matter what the challenges are that are set up in front of the protagonist, there's no connection. There's no emotional resonance. There's no heat, is what we call it in wrestling. Heat's a want, a need, a desire. Um, you know, and we don't care as an audience, because we're not connected to the protagonist. We don't feel the challenges that the protagonist is going through. We don't feel when there's an injustice done to the protagonist. We don't care. You know, I always use this to help teach my students so that they understand this concept. And it's the easiest way that I can explain it. Okay. If we walk outside right now in a parking lot, okay, wherever you're at,
Yep.
walk outside, parking lot, see somebody setting fire to a car. It's not your car.
Right.
Let's be honest. And don't lie to yourself. I always give this advice. Okay.
Probably call somebody at most.
You're going to lie to we lie every day. All of us lie every day.
Yeah.
Okay. The one thing you should never do is lie to yourself. Just be straight up honest. Okay. If you walk out and you see somebody setting fire to a car, it ain't your car, you're probably, if we're lucky, going to call 911.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to pull out your phone and scream World Star Hip Hop and video it. Why?
It's not
It's not
my
your
car. Right.
Right? You don't care. You have nothing invested. Now, if we walk outside and we see somebody setting fire to your car, we're probably going to get involved to some degree. You're going to take some kind of action. You're not going to just stand there. You're going to be, because you're going to be more motivated, because it's your car. If we walk outside and we see somebody setting fire to your family, to your car with your family, your dog in it, well, you're probably going to physically you're going to get involved and try to stop this person from setting the car on fire. You know what I mean? Because you have more to lose. You have more invested personally. The objective as a writer or a performer, if you're the performer and you're the antagonist, the objective is to do everything you can to help the protagonist become the audience's car, at least their car. A home run is where the protagonist becomes their car with their family and their dog in it. Because now, if I'm the antagonist, I do one thing one thing to the protagonist. I've just now done it to everybody that's watching or reading or witnessing whatever is taking place. And now you care. And that's been lost in modern professional wrestling for the very reason that the performers don't sell the basic things, which is who they are and why they're in the ring doing it, which is the outcome. And so for you, it's hard for you to connect and become interested in it anymore because you can't describe the biggest test. I always say is if you can describe a performer in a sentence or less. Because if it's somebody that's really done their job, whether it's they've written a character in a book or it's a movie star, it's a TV series, you'll go to your friends and family and you'll go, oh, you got to check this out. There's this guy and he's A, B, C, D, E. You have just described who that person is, what they stand for, and why your friends should care about them in a sentence or less. Because if you really think back about it, whenever there was somebody that really caught your imagination, you were able to do that. And that's what makes a person a star and makes them an attraction, is because now you're going to sell them as much and as effectively as they do themselves to your friends and family. And your friends and family are going to go do it too. And they're going to sell as well. Can't do that if you can't describe them. If you can't connect with them and you can't describe them, you can't sell them. And if you can't sell them, then you're not going to want to watch them. And that's the problem with the majority of professional wrestling today, is that there are a vast majority of very talented, physically gifted, amazing athletes. You can't describe them. And listen, that's not just for professional wrestling. NBA, you can describe, every major NBA player that's on every major NBA team. There's one player Michael Jordan can describe him. You know what I mean? Charles Barkley, you can describe him. Baseball, Reggie Jackson, you can describe him. You know what I mean? Babe Ruth. I can go down the list of major baseball players, because that's one thing professional sports took away from professional wrestling, if you've noticed. And that is that they stopped trying to sell the teams and they started selling one or two players against one or two other players on the opposite team, so that they could create a story, so that they could then create heat, so that then they could create an interest for an audience to want to watch to see the outcome, because now the outcome mattered. Dana White with UFC even said himself that when the success of UFC was completely off the back of Ultimate Fighter. Why? Because an audience could watch Ultimate Fighter, could get to know who the fighters were, and then personally care more about who won and who lost. Absolutely. That's how valuable it is, and that has changed. That's been lost in professional wrestling over the last few decades.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I watch MMA too, and it is the guys like, Conor McGregor jumps off the page, of course. Conor McGregor's on, I think, maybe a 3-4 fight losing, but he's still more money than anybody because
you'll still pay to see him, because you know who he is, you like him or you dislike him, but you can relate to him, and that's the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because let's face it, unless you are in MMA, you don't know can't appreciate all the nuances of what's going on in that octagon, when it's happening. And that's why they changed the rules in MMA to force the fighters to stand up more and longer, because we can relate to people punching each other in the face. But down on the mat, if you pay attention, you listen to an audience, when the minute they go down on the mat, the crowd just kind of goes, oof, and drops, because it's like, well, we really can't see what's going on, and it's really not that interesting anymore. Yeah. We're standing up. Well, we get that.
You got like a couple second window. If there's going to be a choke they'll get that. But if it's too long, you're right.
Yeah. And that's why they try to get them back up.
Yeah.
Get them back on their feet.
This one more question about just talking about businesses and different jobs. One other thing you did do, I want to touch on. I was more curious if this was something you enjoyed doing as well. You did color commentator for a little while.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Yeah. Apparently, right now I can't do it because of the wonderful dulcet tones of my voice, um, but yeah, I enjoyed that very much. It's a whole new challenge, and there's a lot more. It takes a lot more than a lot of people realize, and a lot more skill and a lot more practice, to be able to do it and to do it well. And if it weren't not for Jonathan Coachman and Michael Cole, I mean, they carried me, and they were so good that they made me passable. So I owe them a lot.
It's a real. I always got the vibe. It's a real. I mean, everything you kind of need each other, but with commentary in particular, it almost felt like a real team effort more because you're help getting the wrestlers over. As Jim Ross would say, you're providing the lyrics to their music.
Yeah, yeah, you are, and that's what makes Jim Ross so good, is that the objective is, as a commentator or a color commentator, is to really sell the emotion of what's happening in the ring, and the thought process behind it, so that an audience could possibly relate at least a little bit to what, again, as a commentator, a color commentator, based off of what the wrestlers provide, they're trying to sell who that guy is and why he's in the ring. What's he trying to accomplish based off of what he's doing, you know, and um, sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge, to be able to do that and to keep it entertaining, to keep an audience's interest. It can be a very uphill challenge anymore. So, when you've got a guy like Jim Ross or Coach Jonathan Coachman or Michael Cole, that can do it and do it so well that it looks effortless. And you got to keep in mind, people don't realize this, but while they're doing that, Vince McMahon is literally in their ear, screaming at them, cursing them like dogs. You know what I mean? Yelling at them, telling them stuff to say and how to behave, and to try, for them to be able to keep their focus and to maintain their composure going through all of that. And, and the wrestling's happening like in a
Right.
heartbeat. Well, they got to be pretty amazing. So,
Selfishly, my producer is asking me to ask you this question, so I will. We've done a little commentary on the side for some people. What is some of your prep work for commentary?
uh, well, I try not to do much
Okay.
prep work, because that way I can give an honest reaction. But if I don't know a performer when they arrive, then I want to try to get a little bit of background on them. I'll ask them questions about you know what they're going to do that evening or why they're going to do it. So that it can help me to sell better those two things, the who and the why, as much as I can. And explain what within the context of a trying to sell it as a competition, and that we're watching a real sporting event, and there's a game of chess going on in the ring, strategy. There's so that if they're not physically telling some kind of story, maybe verbally I can tell one for them.
Absolutely. Now, like I said, we had last talk in 2019. A lot of stuff has happened since then. The whole world got a little crazy. My question is, with COVID and everything, especially initially, how was it? I imagine challenging, but keeping OVW going and still going.
Yeah, still going. Um, it was very challenging because we weren't able to run any events. We weren't able to have an audience. And it was, we were fortunate from a standpoint that um, I really make an effort to try to tell stories. That we did a lot of recap shows, I guess, at first, at the initial part of the pandemic, so that we could just continue to have new shows every week, new episodes of television. I didn't want to just rerun an episode of television. And to a degree, those were easy because we had the advantage of just encapsulating a 6 or 8 month story into a 1 hour format. But they were a challenge from the standpoint that um, now the wrestling talent were not, they were not the sell. You know what I mean? They were not
Hmm.
per se. We were capping the story, so a lot of times I had to create a thread within the show with the hosts because they weren't commentators anymore. They were just hosts for a show. So to keep an audience interested, because they were very much as much a part of the show as the wrestling was, in keeping the audience, I had to create a kind of story or thread from start to finish with the commentators, or i.e. hosts, throughout the show, that it told a story within the story each week. And then I had to go back and take let's say we take 6 months, and I had a great team of people that helped. But I would have to go back and, let's say, I'm going to retell a story that ran for 6 months. Well, I would reach out to Michael Melkor, is one of the guys on the team. I go, Michael, I'm going to tell this tag team story. And he'd go, okay. And I go, okay, I need, for the last 6 months, I need every episode that these guys were on, whether it be just a promo, whether it be a backstage vignette, a wrestling match. I need all of those. So he would go back and he would research, and we had to do this on a weekly basis, just so you
Hmm.
know. He would go back and he would research and give me 6 months, sometimes 8 months of episodes, weekly episodes, that would have that particular tag team featured to some degree in some way. I would then have to go through, pick out take every episode that had them. Then I would, because I have to do it with pencil on a piece of paper. So I would have to write out every episode they had. Then I had to go through, based on the story I was trying to tell, and pick which one of those I thought helped tell that story the best. And then I had to go through that and then pare that down again. Then I had to go through, and because we do a 6 segment show, I had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to that story. So I had to pick out again whether it be a promo segment, or it be a backstage vignette, or it be a wrestling match, and I had to pick out what those were and have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and put those in the right place so that the flow of the show would go the right way and culminate at the end so that it would maintain an audience. And sometimes it would take me, to write a 1 hour television show would take me 6 to 8 hours
Hmm.
to write. And then for whatever reason, when we would go to produce it, because what I'd also have to create a thread, a story within the show as well, a story that involved the commentators, the hosts, a beginning, a middle, and an end for them. And so sometimes that would take me 8 to 10 hours each week just to write 1 hour of television. And but at the time we were doing 2 shows. We were doing OVW, and then we were also doing OVW Overdrive. So for each one of those shows, they had to be different, they had to be unique, and they had to have their own format, and they had to tell their own stories within the hour. And it got, sometimes got pretty hairy, and they would take, to produce them, would sometimes take anywhere from 5 to 6 hours to produce. Just
Hmm.
doing the intros, the ins and outs, the pitches, and the a lot of times would take about 5 or 6 hours just to produce. And we did some great television and some interesting shows, but boy, I was glad when
Huh.
we were able to just go back to a regular format of,
Yeah.
which is not easy in itself, because we're outside of WWE and AEW, we're the only other company that does live weekly television. And so that's usually, it's probably the most stressful 2 hours of my life, because every Thursday we do, from 7 to 9, we do live television. So, but it takes me about anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to write 1 hour of television or 2 hours of television. And then, once we get rolling, it's 2 hours and we're done. It's a stressful 2 hours, that's for
Yeah.
sure. That's why I've got more gray everywhere now. But it was a lot. It's a lot easier than doing those post-produced shows. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just sounded like it just. Ugh. Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously you love it, but it also sounds like there's a certain tedious aspect of having to go through all that stuff too. I don't know if that.
Oh, everybody's like, I find it funny because everybody's like, oh, it's so cool. Hey, I'd love to be a part of creative. And I'm like, really? Really? Do you really want to be a part of creative? I don't think you really want to be a part of creative. Oh, no, no, it'd be awesome. That'd be great. Okay. Well, then they usually last about anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, because I'll let them, sit in and be a part of it. And at about week 2 or week 3, they tap out because it's
Hmm.
like, wait a minute, I got to do this every week, and I've got to do this every week and make it connect to last week and connect to the next week, and I got to make it bigger and better than what was last week, and make it. It's just, it never ends. It's never ending.
Um,
So
I'm curious. Just get your opinion on this, and this would be more like a general audience. Nobody's exactly the same, obviously, but when I was watching a lot of matches in empty arenas, especially during this time, and I would watch like MMA in empty arenas. One thing that jumped out to me was in MMA, I found it more interesting because I was so much more invested in the outcome. Whereas with wrestling, it's more about, as I'm older now, maybe because I'm not a kid anymore, right? So some of it's gone. I've been through it for a while. I'm not as invested in the outcome. I'm more involved. Like my brain watches the overall performance and everything. And there was still stuff where every once in a while I'd lose it and I'd get into it, but it just wasn't as appealing to me. Is that because we've gotten away from the art a little bit too, or what do you think that is?
sorry, I
Oh,
lost you there for a second.
yeah.
Yeah. So you were saying that in MMA, there's so much more invested in it.
Well, for me, at least as a fan, I feel like I know a lot of fans felt this way too. I was more invested in the outcome,
Yeah.
whereas in wrestling, it was more about the show. When I was a kid, maybe I would have been
And see,
just
that's the problem. That's what we've talked about this whole
right.
time. Is that in the past, the performers made the outcome the most important thing. And now the performers make what they do the most important thing, not why they're doing it. And without an audience, you know, um, there's the lack of that interaction and reaction, and it just doesn't sell. I refused during the period of time with COVID to do empty arena shows. I felt that it exposes the performers. I think it exposes the profession itself. I think it's just. I think that it exposes the fact that today's performers don't perform for you, the audience, anymore. They don't care about you. They perform for each other. That's what they care about, and they want to impress each other. And that's why if you paid attention, the wrestling matches that you watched during the empty arena time were no physically different than they
Right.
were if there were 25,000 people sitting in there.
Hmm.
The reason why the performance never changed, the pacing, the timing, there was no hesitation, was because they never are ever performing for you. They're performing for each other backstage.
And I'll throw this out there too. I will say this: occasionally you would run across a performer, and I'll use her as an. It was like Bailey. She was having a match, and she started like yelling at Michael Cole. She started getting like little different things involved.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and now I'm like, oh, okay, I'm at least entertained. She's doing things
right.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what separates, somebody who can really become a star from the pack, that is just, yeah, another face in the crowd. Because you can relate. You can imagine that if it were real and you were in an empty building, you'd be yelling. If you didn't like Michael Cole, you'd be yelling at Michael
Right.
Cole. You know what I mean? That's that's not unusual. That would not be outside the realm of possibility. But to be in an empty building and just act as if, well, there's still millions of people, there's still thousands of
Right.
people in the building watching me, and I'll just behave the same way. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That's what definitely showed. One other aspect in training and stuff like that I was thinking about this week. Brian Kendrick got himself in a little hot water with some stuff he said in the past. And that made me wonder, you guys are working training. Is there a thought about training these guys to be careful what they say in social media now?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I personally think it's become so, social media is not the problem. It's how
Mhm.
your use of social media is
Right.
the problem. That's the real issue. And, I've had conversations with OPW talent, you know, in regards to the proper use of social media. And it's challenging, especially in today's world. Social media can be a minefield. And I've listened to, I've spoke to and read uh, several papers by a psychologist who pointed out that, like, and I brought this up before in the past too, that like social media is probably one of the most uh, um, inefficient forms of human communication there is.
Hmm.
Um, Twitter lends itself to being negative. And one is because genetically, biologically, we are predisposed to be negative. It's a survival instinct from back in the day, that we're always anticipating the negative, so that we're always on watch, we're always on guard. In today's world, it doesn't necessarily need to be so prevalent, but that in society has a tendency to rear its ugly head, and even more so on Twitter, because it's such an abrupt way to communicate thoughts and ideas. You only get 200, what is it now, 240 characters now, I think it is, or 280, something like that. And so it's a very succinct, very 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 intense form of communication, human communication. And really, all social media is not uh, very adept at human communication, because 80% of human communication is body language
Right.
and tone and inflection. And there's so much more into the art of communication than what you're going to gather off of uh, off of social media. The other problem with social media is that it emboldens people to either say the wrong things, because of the feeling of anonymity and safety in distance,
Hmm.
from any possible repercussions. Um, or two, it because of that anonymity and that safety of distance and from repercussions, allows them to now become more judgmental and more sanctimonious and more self-righteous. I know, let's face it, we all have made mistakes at some point, said something dumb,
Right.
done something dumb. You know what I mean? There's not one of us. There's no truer saying than he who is without sin cast the first stone. You know what I mean? If you live in a glass house, don't throw rocks. You know
Right.
what I mean? Yeah, do not judge other people so harshly simply because they sin differently than you do today. I mean, and especially pay attention and realize that whatever somebody said 10 years ago, they're not that same person 10 years from
Right.
hence. They've grown, they've evolved, they've developed. I'm sure they, it's would be surprising that they may have the same opinions. So don't be so quick to condemn and be so quick to judge in regards to, you know, social media behavior. But it's essential that I think people that are in the public eye really need to know how to navigate and manage their social media as adeptly as they possibly can, because it could be a wonderful, amazing tool that for a performer, like
Right.
for wrestlers, we used to be 100% reliant on a promoter and his platform of television. to allow us to garner an audience. But now these days with social media, you can build yourself into an attraction, and you don't have to be on TV. I mean, a prime example of that as far as wrestling is look at the Young Bucks,
Yeah.
and look at the circumstance, the situation that they're now in. But the reason they're in it is because of the fact that they used social media so expertly to be able to make themselves into attractions and into a money drawing act, and that was all through the use of wisely using social media the correct way. So
Absolutely.
it can be a great tool, and it can be also, just like a hammer. It can be
Mhm.
a great tool, and then it can be a terrible one when you take it and start hitting people in the head with it. So
Absolutely. And the Bucks too. One other thing I want to say about them just popped in my head. They use social media, and then when they started meeting their fans, I heard them say this: what they would do, what they call the Young Bucks experience, almost taking like a campaign trail. They would give them like an experience, and they would
yeah,
really go out and help the fans. Like to me, that's just so
smart,
smart. Yeah, building
smart,
the brand, right?
very smart. Very smart. But you've got to be. I really think it was one thing because we're with OVW. We have a wrestling school that's a part of it, and we're the only accredited by the State Office of Proprietary Education as an actual trade school for professional wrestling, which it should be anyways.
Mhm.
All real legitimate professional wrestling schools should be considered trade schools because you're not. It's not like boxing, a boxing gym or an MMA gym. You're teaching skills for these people to follow and pursue a vocation. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're not just teaching them how to physically do something in the ring. You're giving them information on how to succeed to pursue a career in entertainment. So it should really be considered a trade school across the board. But there should be an aspect of it. And, we certainly, as we grow and develop, are going to enlist a social media expert to hold a class that, teaches the students, the proper way to adeptly use social media to their advantage so that maybe they could avoid some of the pitfalls that some people have done in the past.
One thing I want to ask you too, while it's in my head, your longevity. You've been with the business for so long. What do you think, for you personally? What is the big thing you attribute that to?
I don't have any real talent of any sort. The only real talent that I have is that I just don't give up. That's it.
Mm,
So I think that's been the only reason that I've survived as long as I have is that I just don't quit. Maybe at some point I'll smarten up and and you know go, okay, that's enough. I'm done. But until it's something that I no longer enjoy, until it's something I'm no longer passionate about, that I don't love anymore, when it gets to that point, then I'll quit. Um,
yeah.
but so far, I still love it.
Now you did get to work on some movies and stuff. I saw. What was that experience like for you?
Um, Completely different world.
Mhm.
There's a big myth or misnomer. A lot of people believe that wrestling is just like acting, and it is. It's not. In no way, shape, or form is it even remotely the same. It's a whole different world with a whole different set of etiquette and rules and expectations, and you've got to be willing to go in and be willing to pay your dues the same as you did in wrestling. Having an audience, an existing audience that knows who you are and that they can market to, the producer will market to, will open the door, get your foot in the door. But to keep your foot in the door, you've got to be willing to learn and learn new skills and learn a new approach on how to do it because there are different. It's a different world in acting as opposed to professional wrestling. But I love it. I love wrestling more because it's there's the interaction of the audience and it's live and it's you have the freedom, a lot more freedom of creativity. Whereas in acting, you have a written script that you have to follow,
Yeah.
and your only feedback on your performance is from the director a lot of times. Hey, was that what you wanted? Did I give you what you need? And then and some directors will just, yeah, sure, fine. or, or they won't even say anything. So you don't know until, and movies take forever to get done, producing them and then, actually acting on them and then producing them and then going through all the editing and color correction and, ADR and everything like that. It's months before you finally get to see the finished product, and even longer sometimes before you get to see it played in front of an audience and to see if the audience picked up on what it was you were trying to deliver, as opposed to wrestling's right then and right there. And, and the difference with wrestling is that it lives in that moment, you know, your performance lives in that moment. And no matter what, like, even if I wrestled the same guy tomorrow night, what's in front of a different audience in a different building, a different location of the country, it's going to have a different energy. It's going to have a different vibe, and it's going to be completely unique for that night. And then the next night, again, completely unique. Where with acting, you hit it, and you've been filmed, and then now that lives on in perpetuity for forever. That one performance. So.
What would you say has been? You also wrote a book. What would you say has been your favorite? I mean, obviously with the book, you're writing about wrestling. What was your favorite outside project so far? Was it acting? Was it writing? Anything else? Maybe I'm missing.
Um, I think outside of the ring, my favorite thing has been, producing, directing, and writing the weekly television show. I really, really enjoy the challenge of that. It does get sometimes like, ugh,
Right.
but I really do enjoy that a lot. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed working with Ross Owen Williams and writing the book. I have a comic book out now that I really have been enjoying being a part of as well. It's completely different and a whole different process. And I'm very fortunate because there are a lot of really big, heavy hitters, artists and inkers and letterers and writers that are in the comic book industry that are involved with it, that want to be involved with it, that work on other major comic book projects that, forego those so that they can be a part of this. And it's been a different project too. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. So, but I got to say that, if I were to pick one, if wrestling tomorrow were to come to an end and I were to really focus on pursuing one particular thing, I think I probably would pursue acting, because it's performance wise, it's a natural extension of what I've been doing. And it's not as hard on me as the wrestling is.
Absolutely, I imagine. I'm gonna get to. We got a question in the comments about that comic book. I'll get that. We're gonna talk about promoting and stuff you got coming up. One last
Sure. Yeah.
question before we get to that. Pretty big moment. Not everybody gets this thing that happens in life, but you saved somebody from drowning. I want to say it was September of last year. I mean, it's just a moment where you never know what's going to happen, and I'm sure that must have been intense. But I'm just curious, just on a human. What was that whole thing like? What was,
It's still surreal, I guess. You know, the little boy and his mom. We've spoken to them since, and the little boy, he had uh, bought this. It's like a block of wood, and it had a painting on it. It was an angel, and he asked his mother to send it to me because he felt like I was his guardian angel, for saving him. So I, yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's just,
humbling? All right.
yeah. I mean, it was. I just look. I was in the right place at the right time,
Mhm.
and thank God that it worked out well for everybody involved, because it almost, for a brief moment, I thought it wasn't going to. Um, I really had a moment where I thought, well, this is going to be the way I go. Um, you know, and but I was able to get him to safety, and I myself was able to get to safety, and I'm grateful for that more than anything else. And I just, I didn't do anything that anybody else. Just be in the right spot at the right time, and you don't think about it. You just look, and
Yeah.
I gotta go. Somebody's got to go, because if you don't go, he's gone. He was literally, when I heard him scream for help, and it caught my attention. And I look, because to help tell the story, a tropical storm had come in. We were in Destin, Florida, and a tropical storm had come in the day before. So when we stayed over an extra day, we weren't even supposed to be there that day. We were going to go back to Louisville, and the only reason we were there was because we had missed out going to the beach the day before, because of the tropical storm. So when we came down to the beach, the waters were pretty rough already. They weren't terrible, but I noticed, a little bit down from us, there was a section of the beach that had a lifeguard. She was sitting in a chair, and she had cones set up, basically designating that this right here, that section of water, that was a no swim zone, because apparently there was, I didn't know at the time, but there was apparently a very strong riptide in there. And so you could swim you could be all around that area and everything. It was, for whatever reason, in that particular area they designated where that was where, it was pretty strong. The currents were really dangerous. And the little boy was swimming, and he wasn't on a raft or a float or anything. He just was swimming, and he happened to go over into that area. And as soon as he did, it was like watching somebody, like there was a tow rope attached to his heel, and he just was being pulled out to sea. And he was frantically swimming, and he started panicking, and could not stop. I mean, he was just going. I was picking up speed, um, you know, uh, and going out to the ocean. And I was maybe, it's so hard to determine how far away I was, but I was maybe a football field away. I don't know,
Mm.
and I kind of half swam, half ran, and I got him by the wrist, like like if I had not caught him, that would have been it. He was going to go. He was
Sure.
going to go out to where it would have been no man's land. Like nobody would have been able to get to him quick enough. You know what I mean? And because he was picking up speed as he went, he was going faster.
Wow.
And I caught him, and then grabbed him, pulled him to me, and a wave kind of went over us and took us under, and I could feel the undertow pulling me. I had to dig my feet as deep as I could in the sand and push as hard as I could forward. And for a brief moment, because one of my kids, my trainees, Shad Gaspar, the year before had
Oh yeah.
died this exact same way. He and his son were in Venice Beach, and the riptide caught his son. He went out to get him, and it took him on out, and he died. And I thought, for a brief second, when that wave came over, I thought, well, maybe this is going to be, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go the same way. And luckily that all worked out. So, thank God.
Yeah.
So,
You know, I wasn't planning on even asking this question. I'm just curious about this. You said something. This is far less serious, but interesting to me as a fan. When you train everybody at Tough Enough, there
yeah,
was a brief storyline, and you were talking about Shad just now. You called him one of your kids, and there was a
yeah,
storyline where I don't even remember who it was in this moment, but Josh was getting roughed up by one of the talent on TV, and you
yeah,
made this line. You basically said, "Don't mess with my kids." And
right.
I remember that as a performer, and I always thought that didn't really end up going anywhere, but I thought that was so compelling. I always was wondering, was there something that was going to go with that? Do you know? And did you really feel into what you were doing? Because that felt very
Oh,
real.
yeah. Yeah, because um, what people don't understand, and it's not this way anymore, okay? In professional wrestling, because it's kind of, honestly, it used to be kind of like, it was like the mob. There were rules of behavior, there were rules of etiquette, responsibility. It was very, very similar. And one of those rules were that you were responsible for whomever you brought into the business. When you train somebody, it's not where you just train them and off they go. It's now it's like like an apprenticeship,
Mhm.
and you're responsible for them. And if they do anything, and I do mean anything, that now affects adversely business, you're held responsible. That's why so many guys were so reluctant to train young guys back in the day, because they were held accountable for who they brought in to the business, because the business was so closed, so secular, and you were known as their kid. That's a term from boxing too.
Mhm.
If you're a boxing trainer, then those are your kids. Not that you're their parent, but you are responsible for them, and you're responsible for making sure that they're taught the right way. You're responsible for making sure they behave in the right way. You're responsible for, responsible for their well-being. You're responsible for their safety. They're relying on you. They don't know anything, and so that term, somebody's kid. I'm 58, and I'm still known by a lot of old timers as Jim Lancaster's kid. If and to this day, like if one of those guys, from back in the day were to watch this and I were to say something that they didn't agree with, well, they're going to call him and they're going to go, "Hey, I heard your kid on this podcast and he said blah blah blah," and then he's going to call me, and I've got to have an explanation, because I'm now a reflection on him. And that's where, when I was training the kids in Tough Enough, I refer to them as my kids, and I always refer to any of them that are like in OVW, they're my kids, meaning they're a direct reflection of my reputation now. Where if you come in and you're there and you're somebody that now I've taken under and I am teaching and training, well, now JR's not going to go, oh, that's Joe Sausage Head. You know what I mean? He's going to go, oh, that's Joe Sausage Head. That's Al Snow's kid. And that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be my kid, which means that if that kid looks great, I look great. That kid's the shits, I'm the shits.
Mhm.
And it comes back on me. So that's where all that came from.
All right. Well, I always feel like I'm learning when I'm talking to you. I really enjoy it. Passion comes out, man. I would be. There's stuff I watch shoot videos in preparation for this stuff, and like I love how you explain WrestleMania 3, Hogan and Andre being the match because that's the match people came to see, and it just clicked for me because I was a Steamboat Savage fan, right? I love that
And
match,
listen, I was too as a
right?
fan. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? As a fan, I loved it.
Mhm.
I'm not disagreeing with people's opinions as regards to a fan. What my concern with all of that was as a wrestler. I, look, Savage and Steamboat could have every the greatest match in the world. I don't care, because I want to be Hogan and Savage. And what I was witnessing and what I still witness is that all of the wrestlers now want to be Savage and Steamboat. None of them want to be Hogan and Andre. And it's like, why in the world would you not want to be Hogan and Andre? At 93,000, I guarantee you Hogan and Andre got paid a lot. And I mean, not just a little, but a
Life
lot
changing.
more. Yes, a lot more money for that one night's worth of work than Savage and Steamboat could have ever imagined receiving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you want to be Hogan and Andre? That's insane. Not to mention, other than arm drags, not disrespecting the match, but other than arm drags, you're probably only going to be able to tell me that about Savage and Steamboat, maybe one or two other things. Where if I ask you about Hogan Andre, you could probably recite the entire match to me.
There's a point to that. Yeah. The slam, the
That's
knockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what makes it. It's not what's done. It was when it was done and why it was done that elicited that memory for you, to where you could still to this day can recite what happened. Where with Savage and Steamboat, there was so much that was done. You can't keep track of it all. So
We had a question in the comic books. I'll put this under the promotion. They wanted to know where they could purchase it. So that and
okay,
anything else you want to promote.
sure. You can purchase the comic book. It is the Ballad of Al Snow and Head. It is a 40-page comic book. It is not, just so you're aware, it is not a wrestling comic book. It is wrestling character driven. So like this first one, the story starts out, I'm in a wrestling ring. Okay. And because I'm crazy, all of the stories take place up here in my head. So it starts out in a wrestling match, the very first issue, and then I get hit in the head. And then I'm in a post-apocalyptic world where I operate a detective agency, and Head is my partner. Pierre is there, so is Pepper. I overhear that a barmaid has had her heart stolen, and I think she's literally had her heart stolen, as opposed to that she's fallen in love. And I now take the case and go out and try to find her heart. And I actually do find a real heart. It just isn't what I was thinking. And it leads to some ridiculousness, and the artwork is amazing. And then we have it's coming out next week, actually. Uh, it is like the old Marvel team up. So there are two titles. There's the Ballad of Al Snow and Head, and then there's the Adventures of Al Snow and Head. And this one's about a 22-page long comic book, and it features myself, and I'm teaming up with Chavo Guerrero Jr., and we're in a Western. So it's completely different than, and Chavo's got Pepe, and it's awesome because the way the illustrator did it, whenever you see him riding Pepe, there's always like a cloud of dust, so you can't see his feet, so you can't tell that he's just riding a stick horse. And we're gonna have a second Ballad of Al Snow and Head, where I am a secret agent and I'm infiltrating the enemy to the north, Canada. Um, and I end up punching an old woman in the face in that one. And um, and then there's another Adventures of Al Snow and Head that's coming out with Tommy Dreamer. That one's set in the Prohibition era, with gangsters. It's a little darker. And then with Jesse Goddard's is like an old time carnival setting, and that's where I introduced the Swarm, which was a gimmick that we were going to do in WWE, but Vince turned it down. And that was where I was going to have 20 to 30 little people all dressed alike come out from under the ring and attack people at my command. So in the comic book, the Swarm there's 6 mini-me's that all look like me, but in different like gimmicks. Like I have a Shinobi one, an Avatar one. I have, Leaf Cassidy one.
Yeah.
Huh?
I was
Leaf Cassidy one. Yeah. So I have 6. They're all former gimmicks that I've had. That they're all 6 mini-me's that attack people at my command. And if they go to BrokenIconComics.com, they can purchase the comic books there. Next week, we're doing the Chavo, the team up with Chavo and I, where we're doing a Kickstarter where you can get autographed copies, and we've got special cover editions that are being produced. The first one had an old PWI magazine cover, and it's awesome. It looks amazing. I'll show it to you real quick here.
Oh, nice.
And
oh, very nice. Any old school wrestling fan gets that. That's awesome.
yeah. So the new one, it's got a PWI cover as well, but it's Chavo and I together, so you'll have to check it out. And it's, like I said, it's a Western, so every story is completely different in a completely different circumstance, a completely different era of time, because it all happens up here. And it's true to the wrestling characters. It's just not a wrestling biop. It's not all about being in the ring or anything like that. It's just ridiculous adventures. So.
Very nice, man. Is there anything else you want to promote too?
If anyone wants to follow me on social media, which we discussed, they can follow me at The Real Al Snow, because there were some fakes out there before the blue check mark. Still are. And if you are a person who's going to fake being me, I'm just going to message you and go, why would you not aim the bar higher? I mean, seriously. If you're going to fake being a celebrity, why not be Brad Pitt or Clooney or, you know what I mean? Or Usain Bolt, but you're going to be me. you really don't have high goals. You can pick up my book, Self Help. We talked about that. That's on Amazon. Um, and if you have an interest in OVW, you can go to ovwrestling.com. We're on Fight TV every Thursday night from 7 to 9 live. And we're across the nation on multiple national networks, YTA, Action Channel, Game Plus, and we are also internationally on Sports International in around 700 million homes around the world. And if you are interested in attending the wrestling school, you can go to aswa.live. And we are the only actually accredited trade school for professional wrestling and sports entertainment in the world. And uh, we're just going to keep growing and keep going and keep getting bigger. But on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, it's the real Al Snow. I just put up dumb jokes every day. So that's about
That's
all
good
I
stuff.
do.
I think I remember one you had wrote one day, something about I was asking the wife if I have to have the kids more than just the weekends, and she told me I have to have them every day. Al, we're not divorced. There's something along those lines. I might have butchered that, but like you were
I
trying to
lost you
say,
there. I don't have any audio. Can you hear me?
oh yeah, I could hear you.
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay,
Hold on.
that's all right.
I'm going to hop out and I'll hop right back in. Hold on.
All right.
Okay. I'll be right
Okay.
back.
So since people are still tuning in, and I'm not going to let this be dead air. Oh, here's Al again.
Back. I'm back. I'm back.
That's
I'm
all right.
back. So you
Yeah,
were
okay.
saying what now? What
No,
now?
as we're ending, but it's all right. I was just gonna say, I remember one of those jokes. I think you had a joke about you were telling your wife, "Honey, do I have to have the kids more than just the weekends?" And she's like, "Al, we're
Oh,
not divorced. You have to have
yeah.
them every day." Yeah.
Yeah. I was like when that some of those conversations actually take place, and when Jessica just looks at me like, "What is wrong with you?" She still doesn't get why I love Amish rake fighting. So
Al, I have to actually ask you before I forget. I meant to ask you this before. We did have a fan question, and we
uh-huh.
do a comedy show once in a while too, where we just talk about comedy, favorite comedy movies, sketches. And someone want to know, keeping up with kind of the synergy, what is Al Snow's favorite comedy movie?
Comedy movie, gosh, there's some really good ones. Geez. When the first time I watched The Hangover, that was
Yeah.
one of the few movies like I sat in the movie theater and laughed until I cried.
Hmm.
Like it was genuinely funny. But like one of them that probably as I've gotten older, I've gotten to appreciate more and found it funnier. It was like Caddyshack.
Yeah.
I've gotten to appreciate especially Rodney Dangerfield and Ted Knight. The judge. I really appreciate their comedy even that much more. And Letterkenny, if anybody has not watched Letterkenny, um, it's on Hulu. I think they've got about 10 seasons now, and the episodes are real short. They're probably 20 to 30 minutes long. They don't take much time, but there's the dialogue and the you have to really pay attention because they're so intelligent. The jokes and the quips and they fire them fast. Are great. K. Trevor Wilson is on there as Squirrely Dan, and the best, if you guys watch it, like one of the best episodes is the adult spelling bee. I just because there's always an entry episode. Like I tell everybody, like Bob's Burgers. If you
Right.
like Bob's Burgers, watch Beef Squatch, and then because in order to really find it funny, you've got to know who the characters are. You know what I mean? So like King of the Hill, the introductory episode I always recommend there is the one where Bobby goes for self-defense and he takes a women's self-defense course and learns to scream, "I don't know you, that's my purse," and then kicks people in the nads, and he ends up becoming the bully because he's able to kick people in the groin. Um, just hilarious. But they always have a scene before they actually play the opening of the show, okay, before Letterkenny. And so two of the best ones is the best one I can describe is that you've got Squirrely Dan, Derry, and the main character. I keep forgetting his name. And they're throwing the ball back and forth, between the three of them, throwing a baseball. And they're out, behind the house, and they're talking. And Squirrely Dan reveals that he's had a date the night before. And, he's like, well, kiss and tell. And, so he starts describing the date, and they're still pitching the ball between the three of them. And then he brings up the fact that the date decided that she wanted to, and he says everything with a plural. All words have an S on them. Okay. So he says, well, have any of you tried to have a fingers up your buttholes? And like they immediately, you can tell like it gets tense because the other two characters stop throwing the ball to him and just start throwing it between the two of them. And it's subtle. You don't really get it at first, but then as he keeps telling the story further and he keeps relaying more information about having a finger up his butthole, they start throwing the ball more elaborately between the two of them with like underhanded pop flies so that they can ignore him and him continuing to tell them about having a finger up his butthole. And it's just the visual and the brilliance of the subtlety is just awesome. It's really good.
So good. We talked about promotion. We had real life stories. I don't think there's a better way to end it.
There's a better way than fingers up the buttholes. The buttholes.
Al, thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure. We will. I'm sure we'll have you again on some point because we love doing this and you love wrestling. So just
yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much again.